Do you put something immediately in the Cup Series? Do you try something around, next year's O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in the trucks? Do you try three different things? Ultimately, I can assure you what we want is for the championship and the champion to be somebody that all our fans are proud of in terms of how it was determined.
How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to a very special episode of Out of the Groove. Might have to officially change the name of the show to In the Groove this week, because it is my great pleasure to introduce the NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell onto the show. Thank you so much for being on. How are you doing this afternoon?
Hey, I'm doing great, and I really appreciate you having me. You've dedicated a lot to this sport. We follow it and love what you do. It's where our fans go for a lot of information, which is awesome. So appreciate you actually letting me come and join you.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's been an exciting week already. Austin Dillon, clutch victory at Richmond, leading into Daytona, regular season finale, the O'Reilly Auto Parts announcement this week. It sounds like maybe some schedule announcements coming soon as well. So there's a lot going on. What's your energy level at right now, Steve?
Yeah, no, there is a lot going on. This is an exciting time of the year, as you get in towards those last 10, and seeing Austin win was really cool. Certainly tough last year. We've had some tough discussions with Richard, and understandably so, right? He's a passionate guy. I've known him for 30 years. But seeing Austin able to win, and I talked to him today and texted back and forth with RC. It was cool. It was a cool moment for the sport. He earned it. And then you come into Daytona, that anything goes really coming in here too. A lot of drivers still with a lot on the line to try and get into the playoffs. So it's exciting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to start by asking you about your still fairly new position as NASCAR president. What does your day-to-day or week-to-week look like now, and how do your responsibilities differ from your role as chief operating officer?
Yeah, great question. We've got a really great team at NASCAR. So, the best thing for me to do is usually get out of their way and let them do their job. But, this is my 30th year in NASCAR. I've had the privilege of kind of doing just about every job other than, being behind a wheel or at a race team. So, worked on our weekly racing series, spent some times, on our touring series, was on the marketing side, competition side. So, and then it gave me a good background to work with a lot of our different folks. I try to listen a lot. If we've got to make some tough calls, ultimately we'll do that. But internally, it's really doing a lot of listening and trying to point us in the right direction. And then externally, we've got a ton of stakeholders that all have a big voice in this sport. Number one's the fans that you speak to each and every day, but our race teams, the tracks, sponsors, drivers. So really trying to reach out, have conversations. How are they doing? Where do they see the sports going? And then working closely with Steve Phelps and our board to really set the direction for where we want to go in the future.
I listened to your appearance on the Hauler Talk podcast earlier this year, which shout out to Mike, Amanda, and Nate, and all the folks at Hauler Talk. But I learned so much about you that I never would have guessed, like the fact that you spent years of your childhood living in Egypt. I thought that was insane. So I want to know a little bit more about how your NASCAR career got started. Like, how did you go from living in the Middle East to eventually working in NASCAR? Like, what were you doing before you started at NASCAR 30 years ago?
Pretty crazy story. So, lived overseas and actually went to school to play baseball. That lasted for about a year. I realized there were pretty good players out there that were all getting drafted, and I wasn't. So I went to school at Rollins down in Florida, and I've been in Florida, over 30 years now. So I started out really similar to kind of our short tracks. I started out in minor league baseball, working for single A baseball teams, pulling tarps, you name it, selling tickets, writing press releases, kind of the grassroots level of baseball. And there was a similar job available at NASCAR. And I started out as really the victory lane guy. I went out and, did pre-race, post-race for NASCAR. And then all the decals on the front of the car used to be our contingency program. That was my main job. I went out and sold those decals to sponsors, worked closely with the race teams, and really got to know a lot of folks. So that was kind of my start in the sport. And from there, there's been a lot of luck, I would say. Certainly worked hard, but it's been I've been lucky along the way with good people. And there's great people in the industry, most of whom, you see kind of year in and year out at the racetrack. So it's been a great journey. There's certainly, a lot of positives. There's some challenges along the way, but that's what makes it fun. Every day is different. And ultimately, you want to just try and grow the sport. You don't always get it right. I've made many mistakes, Eric, but hopefully we learn from those and try and make adjustments.
From rolling out the tarp at single A baseball games to president of NASCAR,
Yeah, a little crazy.
that is a remarkable journey. Well, I've got a lot of different hot topics I'm going to throw at you today. We'll start, though, with the news. We're recording this Monday afternoon, so I'll start with the news this morning that O'Reilly Auto Parts will be the new title sponsor for what is now the NASCAR Xfinity Series beginning next year. Yeah, I know the Cup Series has moved away from sort of that traditional title sponsorship model. Is this O'Reilly deal going to operate a lot like the Xfinity deal has up to this point?
Yeah, well, Xfinity has been and still is a great partner for us. And I think, coming up with, where names are made and really showcasing a lot of those drivers, it's a hugely important series for us. If you took the Xfinity Series on its own, and I know you know this, you'd have a pretty good series on your hand, right? When the number of people tuning in, the quality of racing, where we race. So, I think by going out, CW as a partner and getting O'Reilly, we're going to focus even more on the series and see if we can't continue to grow it. It's an important place for us to help bring up drivers. And I think we lost a little bit of, that Cup influence where we had some of the drivers come in and, racing. And you heard Kyle Larson say, I want to go back there and kick their ass, or however he put it. But that was a good benchmark for us, right? You knew that, Eric, if you were racing and you were able to beat Kyle Larson in that series, all the Cup owners took notice, and we lost a little bit of that. So we're looking at the future. Maybe we have some more Cup drivers back in the series, open up eligibility a little bit more. Still trying to figure that out. But I think that's where the series was really clicking, where you had rising stars, getting their names out there, but also being able to showcase their skills against some of the Cup guys every now and then.
Yeah, well, no, that's very interesting. And to that point, you mentioned the CW. The Xfinity Series this year feels like it's kind of going through like a mini renaissance. I mean, the viewership numbers have been great. Some of that's due to rising stars like a Connor Zilic, for example, I think bursting onto the scene. But I think the CW and if I'm not mistaken, NASCAR Productions, working with them on a lot of the broadcast, that I think has played a huge role. So how have you felt so far this year and going into next year about how the Xfinity Series is evolving?
Yeah, I think, that really the sky's the limit for that series. It was a little bit of kind of a, something that we had, and it was just there to people kind of opening their eyes and saying, this is a gem, and we got to go after this and really push it. And we probably didn't do the job that we needed to from a NASCAR standpoint in the past in terms of really getting out there and pushing it. And the CW has shown us, there is a lot more that can be done. I think the boost's terrific. They do a great job for the races and their enthusiasm. Certainly, you said it, right? You got some talent in that series that people want to watch. But we're going to put an even bigger focus on it. And I think O'Reilly coming in will be helpful because they'll be, in the local marketplace. They've got stores everywhere. And we're missing that piece a little bit, where you kind of go to your local area or your racetrack and there's some promotions going on where you can get some tickets. No secret, right? We've got some capacity that some fans can come out on Saturdays, enjoy a NASCAR race and a high quality one at that. So I think it's going to be something that can really grow and continue to grow in the future.
Yeah, it's a great point about O'Reilly and those activation opportunities. Well, some other news, according to reports, the 2026 NASCAR schedule could get released any day now, potentially. We know a lot of the big dates. We know Bowman Gray will be back for the Clash. Homestead is the finale once again. Naval Base Coronado, I mean, that has the potential to be a showstopper. So my question to you is right now, what are you most excited about for the 2026 schedule?
And that's a tough one. There's still a little bit more to come in terms of what may be out there from a schedule standpoint. I'd probably say initially San Diego is going to be just really fun, and it goes back to every year I think Ben Kennedy and his team trying to introduce something new, but also give a nod to our roots too. And historically, Eric, we got away from that. We kind of we went west, earlier in my career to Vegas and California, and which we needed to, but we kind of deserted some of our, tracks that got us to where we were. If we had to go back and do that differently, I think we would have, just even how we messaged it. And I think it's important for us now that if you're going to go to a San Diego or you're going to go to a new market, you better be at a Bowman Gray, or you better be talking, the North Wilkesboros of the world, or, Xfinity and Truck at Rockingham. So we learned a lot, over the years. And so, I'm really excited about San Diego, but just as much so kind of, embracing certain dates, right? That people know that are part of the schedule. And you're seeing a little bit more enthusiasm around NASCAR again. You're seeing more happen at track, which is great. So, I'm just looking forward to the schedule in general, right? Getting started again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you touched on actually my next question right there, but yeah, for every Chicago street race and Mexico City and San Diego, there is a Bowman Gray or Rockingham return this year. So it sounds like that is, that balance is something that NASCAR is very conscious of and is definitely thinking about. Is it difficult though to walk that line?
It is, because you look at even with team ownership, right? As you talk to some folks, I've heard one owner say, why are you in Rockingham? Or I'm sorry, why are you in Darlington? You should never be in Darlington, which to me is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Of course we wouldn't be in Darlington, and we got destroyed when we left Darlington with one race, right? And so we learned a lot. So, but that's a balance of looking at where you're going to be, what fans expect at certain racetracks. So I think it's on us that if you're going to be at a track for the long term, obviously make sure you're investing in that facility, but also looking at some of the challenges around racetracks. If you only have one event, different than stick and ball sports, right, where you've got 16 to 165 races. So we're trying to embrace, what you can do around temporary things, temporary structures, bring in some concerts, bring in some different things. So that's the balance for us, maybe around some of our older facilities, or if you wanted to go back to a short track, doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure that your sponsors understand that, hey, your experience at Bowman Gray is going to be a little different than in Vegas, but that's okay, right? Each track is unique, and we just need to embrace that.
Yeah. Well, we know the final race on next year's schedule will be back at Homestead Miami Speedway. I know there's been talk of rotating the finale between different venues. Do you have any specific tracks that you could see being in that rotation in the near future?
Yeah, I think you don't have to be a rocket scientist, Eric. I think you could look at it too of where we could potentially race. You're really only restricted by weather. So there's always the challenge of you hear some people say, "Oh, could you ever do it Daytona?" Right? Super speedways, that becomes a challenge, right, in the industry. So where that may seem a natural to a newer fan, when you start talking to the industry, that's a challenge. You look at Charlotte, right? Would be really cool. Could you have something ever in Darlington, right? If you changed up some things around the facility, Las Vegas, who knows where you're at in California. But I think as you look at weather in those tracks, all of those could be potentials. And it's something we want to, we're exploring right now, having conversations. And part of it is we want, each state to embrace that if we're coming with a championship, we want to be treated, the same way as other sports. And sometimes we don't get that. But we're seeing that happen now where, people are recognizing the importance of NASCAR and having a date, and the importance of a championship as well. And certainly Phoenix is part of that rotation because they've been fantastic.
Yeah. No, I know Phoenix gets flack from the fan base sometimes, but I give Phoenix its credit. The facility, when you show up in the city, they do a very good job, I think, of promoting championship weekend, at least that I've seen. Well, similar to schedule talk, I do want to talk about playoff formats.
Yeah.
As you know, everyone has a strong opinion.
Oh yeah.
NASCAR, I guess this offseason or this winter, put together a playoff committee to kind of bring a lot of those opinions into the same room. Would you say those meetings have been productive so far? And should fans expect any changes to the format going into next year?
Yeah, so first of all, they wouldn't let me be part of the committee, which I think most fans would probably be
Interesting.
thrilled about right now. So I
Wow, I didn't know
think
that.
I think it's a good thing because we wanted to make sure that we had a lot of voices in the room, varying opinions, right? Some who can't stand the playoffs and want to go back to the way it was, some who want, something in the middle, and some who are very happy with where it is. So a lot of varying opinions. One of the things I learned, really over the last 10 years that's a challenge is when you're having those discussions, someone can have an opinion which has a lot of validity to it, but you end up going a different route. And oftentimes that driver, that owner, or that sponsor will say, NASCAR, they don't listen to me. And that's not the case. I think the importance is that, we definitely listened, but we may have made a decision to go a certain route. And as long as we explain that, you can disagree, and that's okay. But I think it's important to make sure we are listening and we're listening to as many voices as possible. So I would say those meetings have been very productive. The challenge now will be, there's a lot of different opinions out there still. So we are kind of in the final processes. We've tried to talk to as many of the stakeholder groups as possible. We've got a couple more of those conversations to have. And then I think for us, the decisions are going to be, do you put something immediately in the Cup Series? Do you try something around, next year's O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in the trucks? Do you try three different things? Most sports, right, will look at, hey, let's try this in AAA baseball. And if it works, great. If we want to tweak it, okay, let's make those tweaks and then put it to the next level. We've historically not done that. So we're just going to try and beat up a lot of those things. I will say, if we stay status quo and don't do anything in all three series, there's got to be a pretty good explanation as to why, and to who we spoke to. But there is some momentum to try some things for sure. I think you'll see that. I don't have the final answer yet, but I can assure the fans that there's been a lot of really good debate, a lot of things to think through. I'll give you one example. I think even last year, Kyle Larson, rolling off all the wins that he did, and if he's not in the final four, this is ridiculous, right? This is not a good reflection of it, and therefore you should put more emphasis on winning, okay, or the number of wins. So fast forward to this year, we're having discussions about, should wins mean a lot more, even in terms of points. You take SVG, right, and who I think's a great guy, great skill, but polarizing, right? Whoa, should he be treated the same as Kyle Larson, right? And so you got to balance a lot of those different dynamics of where drivers are winning, what tracks, and kind of take everybody's name out of it and just say, look, this is the format. And ultimately, I can assure you what we want is for the championship and the champion to be somebody that all our fans are proud of in terms of how it was determined. I know there's a lot of debate. We have the most passionate fan base going. They don't often agree with me, and that's okay. We got thick skin, but it's also, that's what I love, right? If the fans were silent, that's a problem. And love their enthusiasm and their input.
Yeah. Good point. Well, speaking of thick skin, I guess the next gen car, we can transition to that. That's also drawn its fair share of criticism lately. Now, Richmond, I thought was a great race. Tires wore out a ton, a lot of passing, but that hasn't always been the norm. I think we've seen clean air be a massive advantage, especially at tracks with a narrower racing groove or where there is little tire wear. NASCAR has discussed now openly the possibility of adding some horsepower at some tracks. What other levers could be pulled as well? Are there any car elements that NASCAR is open or actively looking to change?
Yeah, I think probably important to go back to how we got here, right? Because you hear a lot of debate of, this next gen car and, some of the comments that I've seen on some podcasts, I would challenge a little bit in terms of why we got there. It's pretty hard to argue about the fact that if we did not have this new model, we would not have the interest we have from new OEMs, which are getting, pretty heated in a good way. And we not have some of the race teams winning and some of the drivers winning that we have. This model was put in place really to help offset what was becoming an arms race where team owners were essentially car manufacturers, and that model just was no longer sustainable. So, working with the industry to pick out, what parts and pieces would be part of that car, how we could attract new OEMs and new drivers and candidly new owners was an important part of this. Wanted to be driven number one and two by, safety and then great racing on the track. But all of that was kind of how we came together with it. So when you looked at the first year, I'd argue probably some of the best racing we've had throughout our history in terms of what that race car produced, different winners, different organizations winning. And as you've progressed to 2025, what does our industry do, right? We get the smartest engineers in the world, they catch up. And that margin is really small right now. And so you're seeing some really good things on the intermediate tracks, the short tracks and road courses. We've had our challenges, totally agree. I can tell you I'm the same as the race fans. If we've got a non-competitive race, you got a bunch of people at the R&D center, and myself included, that aren't happy. And we're not celebrating where we're at, where we go to work. So a long-winded way of saying that we recognize that there's been a lot of catch up with this car. And so the levers that you can pull short term may differ from long term. When we talk horsepower, for instance, horsepower has been on the table for a couple of years. Horsepower going from current levels to 1,000, you will change the entire industry from a cost standpoint, potentially. You will potentially lose the interest from some potential new OEMs. That's not what we want to do. But if we can make some smaller tweaks and recognize where we could put that, perhaps short tracks. You have the debate of is Dover and Phoenix a short track? Not sure. But those are conversations we're having for 26 about an introduction of some higher horsepower at those tracks. That coupled with tire wear. So you've seen Goodyear, who's made a really concerted effort to improve. Every change we make to the car, be it horsepower or aero, is going to affect the tire. So we got to make sure that we have them kind of coming along with us so that what you saw in Richmond doesn't go away, that, hey, we changed the horsepower and now the tire's terrible and or not terrible, but it's not wearing, right? And so you got a problem. So that's the balance on those two. And I think there's some things we can do around tires in general that we're not there specifically yet, but that could affect aero, that could affect what we do with the car and how it races that we're looking at. So there's a lot on the table. We had a drivers meeting in Richmond where they brought up the fact that most of our guys who've won championships are not against this car. They just want to see us continue to evolve and continue to make changes because they see it too, right? As the teams catch up. Our job is to continue to try and make tweaks, but not make it so that whatever we do just costs the industry millions and millions of dollars. So that's the balance, Eric, of balancing those. But ultimately, we got to put on great races. And so I can assure you that the team at the R&D center is looking at what levers they can pull short term, but I'd say more for 26 in terms of horsepower and tires, some things to look at.
Yeah, so you talk about short term there, and I agree with even small changes can be important when all the teams they figure it out, they optimize their setups. You got to keep them on their toes. But you talked about short term, so I'll ask, I guess, kind of long term. I know conceptually the next gen car is kind of different from previous car generations, but what is the runway? Are you guys already talking about the next big evolution, or is it more just tinkering with the current platform for the time being? Where are you guys at there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd say we're kind of in the middle. And the reason I say that is there's so many different technologies coming around now. People are talking about hydrogen, and I know there was a fear at one point, is NASCAR going all electric? No. We wanted to be in that space at least to showcase that we could. So for us, it's really, we got to have the sound. Our fans love the sound, right? We got to have the horsepower. We got to figure that out. So how do we marry that with, where we want to race in the future to continue to put on the most competitive racing? If it's with that car, and it's small tweaks that we can make, I think that's the most economical thing to do for the industry. That's probably where we'd stay. But there's also some things we're looking at, around, the Xfinity Series. Does that vehicle need to look the same? Could you have a different look and feel for that series? And so it's differentiated with truck, different body style, and cup. So we're trying to look at, all of those. Could it be on the same chassis platform, with different body styles? So a lot of things to consider as we look at it. But we're always going to, I think where we want to evolve to, Eric, is that, in the future, that the electric car model where we put something out that doesn't necessarily have to become a series. I'd like to see more of that, to where we're doing some different things with the car. We roll it out. You maybe have, 2 or 3 vehicles, see what you can learn. If you can apply that to a cup car to change it up, great. But our biggest thing, I think, learning as an industry is really around the technology and all the data that's coming off the cars. And, it's become a game of analytics and AI, and that's challenging. And to make sure that, how do you not let that completely take over the racing? And so that the crew chief and the driver are the ones that, this is who's ultimately going to win a race for you, not a computer. And we want to try and balance that as much as we can.
Yeah. Oh no, you're speaking my language there with that last part, for sure. I want to broach kind of a bigger topic real quick here. So you mentioned earlier, early in the next gen, we saw a lot of different winners. I think the word parity has been thrown around a lot, especially the last few years. The equipment is more equal than ever. NASCAR seems to pride itself. I mean, you mentioned like a lot of different ways. You pride yourself on parity. Anyone can win. There are a lot of competitive teams now, and I think we see it also with the playoff format sort of being how it is. I know some NASCAR fans historically have been turned off by dominance. Jimmy Johnson's 5 championships in a row. I was a kid at the time. I got a little tired of it towards the end, but I wasn't a Jimmy fan. So.
Mhm.
But then I compare that to Formula One, for example, where their fans don't seem to mind dominant drivers for a whole season or even multiple seasons in a row. So I guess my question is, do you think too much parity makes it harder for certain drivers to stand out and become the next superstar?
I think it's a great question, and I do, Eric. I think there is a balance there. So, I'm biased, right? NASCAR versus Formula One. I think the challenge in Formula One, you pretty much know, on the restart what's going to happen, or the start of the race. I think our job is to make the cars as close as we can, but let the drivers stand out. So ultimately, I would love to have any one of our drivers roll off, 5, 6, 7, 8 wins, right? Not all the time, but know that if they switched over to, they went from the 3 car to the 12 car, they same result for the most part, right? And just that you knew that driver was at the top of their game and was winning on their merits. Yes, the car and the team and all that makes a difference, right? Which we applaud.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of that helps with, who are the future stars, right? If you've got, 36 different winners, it's hard to point to one unless they're all at an appearance and everybody's like, hey, high-fiving each other. You want to have some dominance. You want to have some rivalries too, right? And I think that, that's important for us with this group of drivers coming up. Is it was important to have as many teams as possible come in and win, and to be able to build up their brands. But it's just as important now that drivers go out there and win, and winning matters. And if they roll off a few wins, that's awesome. If fans are debating SVG, okay, I don't mind that, right? And I think it would be very different, which would be interesting, right? If that was Connor Zilic, who just rolled off all of those wins, Would they be calling you a little differently? Who knows, right? But I think we got to kind of balance those things and see who's winning. Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more in terms of guys going out and winning, but you still want the ability, maybe not for the 36th place team to win, right? I get that from the fans, but if you got 15 to 20 cars that could win a race, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I got a few final questions for you here. I
Yeah.
do really appreciate your time today. You mentioned potential new manufacturers. We know one new OEM for sure. Ram is returning to the Craftsman Truck Series next year, and it sounds like their parent company is interested in returning to Cup one day as well. Can you speak to that process? What have been the hurdles that potential OEMs have encountered when talking to you guys about getting back into the Cup Series?
Yeah, I think the biggest one has really been around the engine architecture. And so I know fans don't love hearing about horsepower discussions, but by having it within the range that we do or a little bit more, that has opened the door to conversations, which has been big. And if you were to take kind of just a V8 and say it's 1,000 horsepower, maybe you'd have Dodge, and that's about it. And maybe the fans would be okay with that. There's something to be said for that. But where we are today and looking at some different things has opened the door for others to take a look at it. We've had some pretty strong interest, other than the folks at Dodge, which is great. Now it's going to be up to us as an industry to say, hey, is this the direction we want to go for the sport? I think Dodge is, listen, when they went away, that was tough. And we love kind of what they're embracing, coming back to the Americana and the brand. I think it matches right up with where we want to be. The Ram truck and Tim Kuniskis ads, that's us. That's what we want. And I think, if we can do our jobs correctly, we will see them continue to move up into the Cup Series. And that'll be awesome. Hopefully that'll help one of our ownership groups as well. I'd say, listen, if we get to 5 OEMs, that would be a really good balance for the sport. But if we're at 4, we'd be pretty happy as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned engine architecture specifically as being kind of that one of those hurdles. Do you ever see a world, future NASCAR Cup Series, maybe the near future, where not every OEM is running the same V8 engine we see now, where there are slight variations that all hit the same? There's a balance of performance there. But do you ever see that? It's kind of a sports car topic, I suppose. But
Yep.
do you ever see that coming to the Cup Series? Is that even a possibility down the line?
It is a possibility, for sure. But it depends on the benefits, right, overall to the industry. So John Probst and I learned something when we were kind of going around with the next gen car and the architecture, and we went over to Le Mans and we talked to the OEMs, and we went over to Australia and talked to all the Australia V8 and the car owners. And they said, don't make the mistake we did, which was they changed their engine architecture and their rules for new OEs to come in, and their existing partners all left. And so it was kind of an eye opener for us that, hey, let's not do something, that's going to hurt the folks who have been with us for a long time. So the good news, Eric, is that our existing OEM partners want new OEMs. They're willing to work with them on kind of what an architecture could look like, but we got to make sure it's the right mix for the long term. So that is something we've discussed. That is something they would potentially look at, right? You'd be more relevant in terms of, hey, that's what I race on the street, or that's what I drive on the street.
Sure.
But still more to come. The balance of power thing is, it's not fun. I think we've got some levers we could pull if we did it. But more, nothing imminent, but something that's definitely been discussed.
Sure. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. I'll
That's
kind
all
of
right.
end with this. I got to ask about the ongoing lawsuits between NASCAR and 2311 and Front Row
Yep.
Motorsports. The teams at least sound dedicated to seeing this through. So does NASCAR believe that a resolution is possible before the December trial date?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, Eric, it's important to go back to, I can't get into the specifics, right, of the litigation, but it's important that I think everyone knows, the team sued us, right? We didn't ask for this. We're still not sure what they're even asking for. Candidly, in terms of an outcome, what we've seen really doesn't have anything to do with why the lawsuit was brought. So it's a little bit perplexing. But I think at the end of the day, NASCAR is certainly gonna, we got an 80-year history for our sport. We've got owners who are, signed up with charters, and we're working hard every day to grow the sport. And I think what's probably most disappointing, even for me personally, is, we're spending time on this topic versus growing the sport. And I'm not sure our fans, want to hear about lawsuits a lot of times. I know it's out there, but we want to be talking about racing and future stars and where we're going to race next, and horsepower, right? And have those debates. So listen, we'll defend the sport and where we are. Hopefully something can be resolved. But we're concentrating on just growing the sport. That's at least that's my job on a day-to-day basis.
Well, obviously, now being the president of NASCAR, we've talked about it. You've seen this sport from a number of different angles. You've been around for many key moments, key decisions, I'm sure. Is there one moment or one decision that you are most proud of in your NASCAR career?
Whoa, man, that's a great question. I think it was, and this isn't just not necessarily just me. It's we've had a schedule that was kind of, this is the way we do it, right? Every year it was the same schedule. You could hear our fans say, really, what are you doing? Our drivers, what are you doing? And I think when we finally kind of broke the mold a little bit and said we're going to try some new things, and I wouldn't point to one if it's the Coliseum or Chicago, but the ability to go try new things, and learn and be okay failing a little bit. Luckily, we've had some successes as well. But I think that opened the door to the sport, and people maybe taking a look at it and saying, hey, NASCAR, it's not the same old NASCAR. They're going to try some things, and they're also going to go back to their roots. And so that balance where we, went to a Bowman Gray, and maybe we went out west somewhere, probably the most proud of. Like, I've seen the sport progress, but not forget where we came from. And that's what I try and keep in mind each and every day is, don't forget where you came from. You got to grow, but bring everybody who got you there along with you.
Yeah, I love that. Well, this has been an honor and a privilege. I really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell, thank you so much for your time, and have fun. Daytona, regular season finale. Big weekend for the sport coming up.
It is. Thanks for all you do, man. Love your passion for the sport, and it's okay to disagree with us loudly. So don't ever hesitate to do that. So appreciate you, man.